Hello and welcome to this edition of A Conversation With. I'm your host, Jim Marshall, and joining us today is Dr. John Quinn. I don't think I ever called you Dr. John Quinn, but that's your official title. And it's funny because I'll mention we're going to talk fishing today, and he is the chairman of the New England Fisheries Management Council. He also has a real day job as the Assistant Dean for Public Interest Law and External Relations at UMass Dartmouth School of Law. Former state representative from Dartmouth and parts of New Bedford for 20 plus years. So
18, yep.
Dad, husband, you've got a lot of titles there to take care of. Thanks for coming in.
Appreciate you having me, and I should hire you as my marketing director here.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty good. So,
fishing industry, huge business, not just in New Bedford, but all across New England. You were actually just recently reelected as the chair of the New England Fisheries Management Council. Talk to us a little bit here, since the COVID pandemic came upon us. Overall, how's the fishing industry doing?
Yeah, it's hanging in there. Certainly, with the the fishing years, the new fishing years start in the spring, so that's right about the time when the COVID hit the hardest. So it was a very challenging first couple of months, the April, May, June. I think it's kind of bounced back a little bit now, but with some of the issues in fish houses and on vessels, very close contained situations, COVID is a concern and certainly has an impact really across the country, impacting the industry.
It's interesting too, because I know we've had the mayor on and just the impact, and I don't think people grasp how valuable the fishing industry is to New Bedford. And I saw that the port in New Bedford, it generates over $11 billion in economic activity every year. It's an amazing amount of money the city relies on, really, in that one industry.
It really is incredible. Usually you take something for granted when it's in your backyard, and the port of New Bedford and the name New Bedford is known nationally and internationally. We happen to be from here, so we think, oh, it's the fishing industry down in the docks, but it's got huge economic impact in the region, as you referenced that report of $11 billion. And nationwide it's known, and I think it's really the backbone of the region when you look at number of jobs and impact and the kind of the cultural component to it. So we're very lucky to have that industry in our area.
And with New England in general, I would assume that obviously New Bedford, a huge impact, most valuable fishing port in the country, but all across New England there's a lot of ports, smaller ports, but the value of the industry and the ports is the same to their local communities.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, it's a matter of scale. So we're a city of 100,000 in a region of a couple 100,000, whereas you might have a small port on the South Shore, Marshfield, or in Plymouth. There's impacts there. Up in Gloucester, certainly, I've been up there many times. Major impact there. And then you've got a lot of ports in New Jersey and Maine, Portland. And, there's a lot of ports that have a similar impact. Because states have different regulations and with COVID and what have you, has the industry been treated differently, I guess, in different places? The impact has been less than or even greater than, say, here in New Bedford? I think about the same. I think it's been across New England. The kind of the strange thing that's come up are these travel bans. Mm-hmm. That crossing state lines, there's been issues of, you can travel for a job, but it's kind of confusing when you're looking at, from the New England Fisheries Management Council perspective, it's New England, but every state has got their own regulation. Right. So it gets confusing and say a hindrance, but you got to be kind of navigating it at all times. And
you've got on a normal everyday year, you've got other vessels from other states down south, the Carolinas, that'll come up here to do fishing and port in New Bedford for a little bit just to do their stuff.
Absolutely, and I know Mayor Mitchell has had this data, which is very eye-opening, but I always tell people to go down to the docks, and I think oftentimes the Massachusetts license plates are in the minority of vessels. Some of these down in New Jersey, Virginia come up here to do their fishing, particularly in the scallop industry, off of the coast here. They come in here, they stay overnight here, fix their vessels here, buy their supplies here, then go back out, and then eventually go back down to their home port. But oftentimes they're fishing out of New Bedford for some period of time.
You kind of referenced, which is interesting too, the ancillary businesses that are impacted by the fishing industry, and I think that's where people don't, I mean, they see the boats, they know people who are going out, but those ancillary businesses are what you're talking about as far as the benefit of a successful fishing industry.
Exactly. You've got, you know, the repairs, we've got shipyards, gear, you know, you go down there, there's, you know, welding, food, a whole host of things, even just gear. You know, fishermen wear certain gear and gloves and everything else, so there's a wide range of businesses that are impacted both directly and indirectly as the industry rises or falls economically.
And that's the same in all ports too,
yeah,
I would assume.
Yeah, and I think one of the things my friend on the Fisheries Council is a fisherman from Maine named Terry Alexander, and he's from Maine. His boat fishes out of Boston, but guess where he buys his supplies? New Bedford.
Really?
Because with the decline of some of these industries, the ancillary businesses have not been able to stay in business in these other ports, such as Gloucester. There's still supply places, but not as many.
Yeah.
So I've on a few occasions picked up gear for him in New Bedford and brought it to a meeting because he's getting the work done down here. So I think there's to some degree of a consolidation on the shoreside businesses.
Yep.
And we're the beneficiary of that. That businesses, a lot of people from out of state are doing business in New Bedford because they've got the number of businesses and the quality businesses and supplies that they can draw on.
And the fish houses are important too, in that I don't know if other ports have the available fish houses that New Bedford does.
Same issue. That, you know, I mean, Gloucester's got a couple, but really, you know, the main processing spot is here. You would be surprised, and I don't have the data, but a lot of species are brought in here internationally in other parts of the country to be reproduced or reprocessed here in these fish houses. So you might get a batch of Icelandic cod brought in here to New Bedford to be processed.
Really?
So there's a lot. It's really an international hub of processing. It's not just the stuff that's coming over the dock here in New Bedford that's going through these fish houses.
Talk to us a little bit too about the council, because some people might not know what the council's role is and what you do on the council. What a member is.
Sure. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. And so, kind of maybe an overview. There's 8 fisheries councils in the United States. One of them that I am on is the New England Fisheries Management Council. We make the regulations across New England. I think there's 17 members now. Each state has a number. It's one state appointee, and then appointees. Actually, the appointment process is you get nominated by the governor of your state, and then the names go down to Washington, and you're technically appointed by the Secretary of Commerce. Mm-hmm. So it's a gubernatorial nomination and a Secretary of Commerce appointment. The terms are for 3 years, and you can serve up to 9 years. And believe it or not, I've just started my 9th year, so I'll be all done in 1 more year.
The council has a lot of things on its plate right now. I know you just had meetings this past couple of days talking about, I guess, Amendment 23, as I read online and what have you, talking about monitors, which I know has been a huge issue for fishermen and the like. Tell us a little bit about the monitors themselves and what the commission is looking at, the council's looking at.
Sure, yep, and monitoring is, as I said in my opening remarks the other day, you know, one of the more divisive issues I've come across in my 8 years up there. On the science side, I think we're trying to improve the stock assessments. We want to know, or they want to know, exactly what's being brought up on deck, what's being discarded over the side, not illegally, but discarded. So what exactly is out there? And there's a school of thought that says without 100% monitoring, you're not going to ever know what is being actually landed for assessment, for stock assessment purposes. On the other hand, it's approximately $700 a day for a monitor. There's various monitoring companies. So a small boat operator trying to, in a challenging economic time, to come up with $700 a day for a 2 or 3 day trip. It's a lot of money. So that's kind of the the balance that you've got. And over the years, the federal government, over the last several years, has funded monitoring at different levels, not at 100%. So it's really a controversial issue. You know, some people in the industry think it's accusing them of being crooks, that, oh, you don't believe us when we tell you what we landed, or you don't believe us when we tell you what we discarded. So, you know, there's a lot of angles to it. Or Big Brother, you got to watch us. We're honorable business people. So, very controversial issue over the years. Finally, this past week, we passed a process or a technically amendment that's got to go through a whole nother process, but likely will be approved, in which over the next 4 years, or 3 or 4 years, there'll be 100% monitoring, but it's paid for by the federal government.
That means that every vessel that goes out will have a monitor on it.
Exactly. And then they will gather the data that they think they need to make a true, accurate assessment of what's out there. And then if additional federal money doesn't come in the 4th or 5th year, it'll kick up to 40%. So the boat would have to pay 40% of $700 or whatever. You know, some schools of thought think that the price will go down, because now that there's a market for 100% observers, other companies will come into that niche market and try and get that. Maybe the prices will be driven down. So that's kind of where we're at. We passed it, so it'll be 100% monitoring starting the next fishing year, next spring or the spring after, technically depending on when they can implement it. And then, so hopefully, over that 3 or 4 year period with 100% monitoring, we'll see exactly what is out there.
When you pass something amendment-wise like that, does that pertain to the other 16 councils? In other words, are New Bedford fishermen treated the same as those in the Gulf?
Yep. Great question. I probably should have given a more expansive description of the council process. We have, we're charged with regulating certain species and all the ancillary things such as observers. So that only applies to New England. In fact, you know, the proponents of regulation would argue we're way behind the times here, in that most other councils have already implemented observer programs and that. So we're only talking about regulations for the New England states and the federal waters outside of the New England states. That's our area of jurisdiction. To expand upon that a little bit and kind of changing topics a little bit, one of the things that's coming up now is with the climate change, stocks are moving north, and species on the East Coast, at least, there's 3 councils: the New England, the Mid-Atlantic, from New Jersey down to I think the Carolinas, and then the South Atlantic down to Florida. So you've got 3 councils. Stocks are moving northward, so a fish is being caught in New England waters that is being regulated by the Mid-Atlantic Council.
Wow. Okay.
One step further on that, a vessel fishing in New England might not have the proper permit to land a tile fish, which is normally regulated by the Mid-Atlantic. And similar at the South Atlantic, Mid-Atlantic line, things are moving north. So we had a robust discussion actually yesterday about trying to coordinate, they call it scenario planning on these changes. Do we kind of overlap the councils? How do we govern this new way in which certain species are landing up in other people's councils' jurisdictions?
Well, it seems that seems to be a tough decision, not a tough decision, but a complicated thing. But I mean, there's no boundaries in the ocean either.
Exactly.
So at some point, the fish are going to go, I guess, in different parts.
Right. Exactly. But I'll give you an example. You know, a New Bedford boat probably doesn't have a grouper or tile fish license.
Right.
And it comes up in their net here. What do? You really technically can't land it, you know, so that's why we're trying to, it's going to be a long process, but we're starting the thought of how do you change the governance structure along coasts where this movement is occurring.
So if that happens, for example, I mean, what is the fisherman to do, especially with the monitor there? It's not intentional.
Yeah. Throw it back over. Right now, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's why, you know, and these licenses are valuable. You know, like a scallop license, you know, where we are, they're not going to move north. They'll be in Canadian waters. But scallop license is worth a lot of money. So somebody's got a license to land scallops. They don't want somebody else landing scallops. That's what they paid for, that license. So it's a very, very complicated thing. I think we're, starting kind of baby steps to address that. But I think in the big picture, that's a critical issue of who can land what where and who's making the rules about what species where.
We're talking with John Quinn. He is the chair of the New England Fisheries Management Council here. You just briefly mentioned Canada too. That's another aspect that, they're fishing under different rules and regulations too. But I would assume they sort of come in our waters?
No, in fact, there's the Hague line, which divides waters. So the Canadian boats aren't supposed to cross the Hague line, and the U.S. boats aren't supposed to cross there. In fact, there's more acronyms in the fishing industry. I'm on the TMGC, the Transboundary Management something or other. So we negotiate with Canada over three stocks that kind of border that Hague line, the Canadian line. So it's haddock, cod, and yellowtail. So we negotiate with them over who should catch what in that area. So that's an interesting thing, and their rules are different than ours. Oftentimes in what type of size can be landed, other regulations, what type of net, and then they ship product into the U.S. So it's there's some criticism by U.S. fishermen. Wait a minute, I'm just making this up. I don't know exactly. A cod can be landed 10 inches long in Canada, and they ship it over here. If I catch a 10-inch long one here, that's illegal.
Right.
But that's coming into our market, so that's a challenge, the foreign imports.
Well, yeah, it just seems that there's obviously the fishermen play by their own rules here, but it's different rules for everybody. I don't know how you even that out. Is that a federal thing that comes out of Washington, or?
Yeah, it's federal. I think part of it is, with these tariffs and everything else that comes into play. But no, it's the same waters, and this northward shift, which, and I'm just saying scallops, if they move north, at some point, are they in Canadian waters?
Right.
And our boats can't certainly go up there to land them. So it's a long-term planning process, but as we know, we already see the impacts of global warming and that, and so climate change. So I think it's hitting the fishing industry now. Again, baby steps, but every once in a while they'll see an article in the paper that somebody caught something they've never seen before in their net, and it's an example of what we got to address.
Well, it's funny, we were talking off camera too about how the value of fish have changed. I remember when I first started working years ago here that monkfish was just a throwaway fish, really, and now it's got its own little industry, really.
Yep, exactly. Yep, monkfish tails. They used to be just trash fish. They throw it over the side. The prices have gone down a little bit lately, but there's certainly a market for monkfish that used to just be garbage. And there's always this move to try and market underutilized species.
Right.
Monkfish. Dogfish has always been trying.
Yep.
It's the other one. They've tried to use stuff that's usually thrown away, other than thrown over the side, trying to get some value out of it.
Are people? Do you see right now? I guess especially during the pandemic, but in general, are people eating seafood though? Do you see that sales are good or strong, and people want the seafood?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's been a dramatic increase in seafood consumption since COVID set in, and more on not on the higher end though. Like these restaurants, all these restaurants closed that are serving the higher end stuff, such as scallops or salmon, the higher end product. So some of the borders were closed for selling stuff overseas, but the more these restaurants reopen, the more opportunity for fishermen to sell their product at the higher end.
One of the other topics, switching gears, that, and no pun intended really, that the council is dealing with too is the use of, talking about climate change, but wind power has been a big issue, and obviously New Bedford has been at the forefront of that. I know the mayor is certainly touting New Bedford as the home of the wind industry here on the East Coast, and good thing. And I know you're talking, you know, you and I were talking off camera about the value that has to the port. But obviously you're balancing the fishing industry as well. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I think the wind is inevitable, but it's my view, at least in New Bedford, is we've got this incredible $11 billion industry, the New Bedford waterfront. So you want the wind to complement, not replace what we have. So where do you find that balancing act of bring the wind in and help them, but at the same time help what's going on? And I know Mayor Mitchell is really at the forefront of both the wind and the fishing, and he's doing a great job with Ed Washburn trying to reach that balance. But a fisherman sees a windmill, hey, wait a minute, my livelihood doesn't include that, and I've been contributing to the economy and supporting my family on fish, not wind. So there's certainly pockets of deep resistance in the fishing industry against wind. But at the same time, I mean, we've got the numbers of how many houses can be heated and electric demands that can be fulfilled. So I think it's, you know, find that balance between complementing and assisting them, but at the same time protect what we have already.
Are you optimistic that the resolutions will be done? I mean, obviously there's nothing built per se yet. I know they want to start building soon. I mean, there's still some federal approvals that have to go through first, but and I don't know if the fishing industry is really the only holdup, if you will. But are you confident that there will be an equitable agreement for everyone?
I think so, and I think you know, there's a couple of issues. This Vineyard Wind proposal, which has been delayed by BOEM, which is the federal entity, and I think I wouldn't read that in a negative way. This is kind of just me talking, because once that one gets put in place, that's going to be precedent setting for all of the other projects that come after that. So I think BOEM is being very careful, dotting every I and crossing every T in this Vineyard Wind proposal to make sure it's done correctly, and then that whatever they decide in this one will be applicable to others. And I'll give you two issues that are very important to the fishing industry, as well as I think being addressed by the wind industry. One is the spacing of the windmills, or the turbines, not windmills, wind turbines. Vessels are concerned of they can't pass through them safely, or they can't fish, you know.
Between them,
Right, between them. So you see a fishing boat, you know, the net is not exactly behind the boat. The net is wide. When the boat turns, the net turns like that. So the spacing of these wind turbines is an important thing, both for ability to fish as well as safety. So that's one that they're negotiating around and everything else. And also, as part of where they are, the stock assessments. So the Woods Hole, who does the stock assessments for the federal government, they can't get their boats in some of the areas that they have traditionally used to do surveys. So what are they going to do? They've been surveying, they call them these time series, they've been surveying 30 years in a certain grid pattern, and now where these turbines are going, they're not going to be able to survey in the same areas. So what value is the survey? And so that's a whole nother issue. And then I think the third thing that is important is the underground cables. Okay, very simple. I'm not an engineer, but you got a cable. They're supposed to be buried 3 or 4 feet. I don't think there's a mandatory requirement, but some of them come up. The waves and the wind and the current.
Yeah, it's nature. Yeah.
Right. Fishing boat comes along, hooks up their gear on a cable.
Now what do you do?
Now what do you do?
Yeah.
Right. So there's all that. So really the spacing and the cables and the stock assessments are 3 things that are important. And
is it a question of amount too? Like, you know, does there have to be? I would think that there's got to be a limit at some point. You don't want to have too many out there.
Absolutely. I think it's the number and location. I know there's a lawsuit down off of New York. Actually, some New Bedford scallopers are involved. Of the location is one of the more fertile scalloping areas. So they're trying to get them to shrink the area that they're going to put the wind turbines in or move the area. But again, some of the areas have more wind, you know, with a high wind and high scallops, who gets that area?
Right.
You know, so the scallop industry would say, we've been there for 100 years. Wind says, wait a minute, this is the best area for us. So there's that, again, that kind of the back and forth between the two industries. But I'm confident there's been 2 entities created. Again, it's a world of acronyms. RODA, R-O-D-A, I think it's the Responsible Offshore Development Association, and ROSA, Responsible Offshore Science. So the ROSA is doing the science. There's wind and fishing people involved in that and trying to work through these issues. One final thing, which I should have said on the underground cables, another issue is there's a company that's trying to get all the cables connected offshore and then come in under one. If you had one cable where all the different wind companies brought
all their
you'd only have one spot. Exactly, right.
Yeah.
So the individual offshore wind companies want to do their own cabling, and of course the company that wants to have one cable wants them all to be required to come through their cable. So fascinating issues, complicated issues, but I hope over time there'll be kind of this balanced approach where they could find that, again, maintaining what we have and bringing in a new industry at the same time.
Got about a minute left. I want to give you a chance. You've got your last year here as chairman. Do you have, I don't want to say goals, but is there something that you hope to accomplish in the next 12 months, really?
Well, I think, you know, I've had a great run here, and I've made great friends on the council really across the country, you know, serving on different things over the last 8 years. I think, you know, trying to put the state of Massachusetts in a situation to continue to be the leader in the fishing industry and in the seafood industry nationally. Like I said, you know, I go to Alaska for a meeting, and they know exactly where New Bedford is, know it all about. I go anywhere in the country, they know New Bedford, and I want to kind of in my last year try and, you know, keep promoting New Bedford and protecting Massachusetts' really lead in this important industry.
Sounds good. Good to see you.
All right.
We'll talk to you again soon on this.
Great.
All righty.
Thanks for having us.
John Quinn's been my guest. I want to thank him for joining us, and I want to thank you for joining us as well. That's a conversation with. I'm Jim Marshall, and we'll talk to you again real soon.